Greetings, viewers. Eric the Car Guy here, back again with another live show where I answer your automotive questions and possibly butcher your names. Apologies in advance. A couple things before we get started. First of which, I will be taking the questions, automotive-related questions, from the Google Plus event itself. Any questions that are posted after the Google event has taken place will not be answered. Any questions that are posted to the YouTube version of this video will not be answered. Mainly because I can't see those questions posted to the YouTube video while I'm doing the live show, so I'm not able to access those. However, if I'm not able to answer your questions today, I would ask that you head over to my website, EricTheCarGuy.com, and there will be links in the description for tons of stuff throughout the show. And there are several things that we have available for you to help you with those automotive issues, should you have them. Now, let's see, any other things? Yeah. All right. Well, one thing I want to say before we get started is the Eric the Car Guy t-shirts. These are available for like a couple more hours, and that's it. After that, they will no longer be available. But the men's version is available for $21, and the girls are available for $22 over at my website. So I'll put a link in the description, but if you watch this later than like an hour from now, it's not going to be available, but you can go to my website right now. There's a link right there on the homepage if you're interested in those. I'm wearing one now, really comfortable. I enjoy it very much. So if you're interested in that, you can do that. But without further ado, let's get started with your automotive questions. And as I said, I'm going to stick to automotive-related questions. So if there's questions about me or stuff that I do, that type of thing, I'm just here to try and answer your automotive-related questions. Spinning through the wheel here, what do we have? I've got Dan Peterson. He has a 2001 Civic manual transmission, and recently it has started occasionally stalling for a second in the middle of driving. The engine will just quit for a second. I'll hear a clicking around the radio and climate control area. I can't figure out any condition common to the times it happened. It recently did it a few times for the first 20 minutes on a trip, but then it did not do it for an hour after that. Any ideas? Extra info if needed. I first experienced the problem when the AC was out and I was testing it to see if it was working, but we got the AC compressor replaced, but the stalling still happens. I haven't tried not having the AC on to see if that somehow causes the problem, but it doesn't happen frequently enough to really test it like that. A common problem on those Hondas of that vintage is the ignition switch, and I'm not talking about the actual mechanical portion. I'm talking about the electrical portion that's attached to the back of it. Sometimes they short out, sometimes they cause either start-stall condition, sometimes intermittent stalling like what you're talking about. It's almost like you've turned off the key. The fact that you've had the the noises around the radio sort of leads credence to this theory in my opinion, because as I said, it's almost like having the key half on and half off sometimes. And a way to test for this, I've actually made a video about it. A way to test for this is to, as the engine is running, take the key and wiggle it around a little bit, and if the engine stalls during that time, you likely have a problem with that ignition switch. As I said, you don't need the metal portion, the mechanical portion. You only need the plastic electrical portion that fastens to the back of that metal portion. So if you open up the steering column, you should be able to find that. There's a little pigtail that comes with it. These aren't that expensive. As I said, it's a common failure. It's probably in stock. I would recommend a Honda part over another part. Even the Honda part is not that expensive. Apparently they had to make a lot of them. But that's where I would look for a problem like that. So try jiggling the key and see what happens with that problem. Let's see. Let's go all the way down. All right. Anthony V. Eric, I have a 98 transport van with new fuel pump, new regulator, new cam and crank sensor in. It can start, but have to hold the gas to keep it going. It spits and sputters. Very bad. Almost like a misfire, but worse. It actually sounds like a misfire. No codes, but a guy said the valves may not be opening. Any thoughts on this as to why this might happen? Maybe timing. Timing is a good thought there. You've replaced the sensors that normally tell the computer where the engine is in order to keep it in time electronically. However, if there's an issue with the mechanical timing for some reason, and I believe that's a chain-driven engine, I'm not really sure, I think it is. If it's a chain-driven engine, it's not likely that it skipped time, but if the timing chain is loose enough, it could cause issues with the timing. However, you didn't mention anything with the ignition system on this. You could very well have an ignition system misfire, and if you have that, it could cause the symptoms that you're describing here. The ignition system not firing at the proper time, or perhaps there's voltage leaking somewhere, say instead of the spark traveling through the ignition leads or coil packs like they're supposed to, they could be shorting out somewhere, and you would have that misfire that you're talking about, and it would be very difficult to keep the vehicle running in that instance. So I would take a good look at the ignition system, and a lot of times, and the thing of it is you already have an issue, and it's going to be difficult to keep running, and it's going to be kind of hard to hold the gas to do this. But normally when I test for ignition system voltage leaks, as they're called, I take a spray bottle full of water, and I just spray around the area of the ignition system. And if the problem gets worse, and sometimes you can even see tiny little sparks, also made a video about this. Sometimes you can even see tiny little sparks that would indicate that that ignition is leaking out of those leads or, say, coil pack. Another way to do this, you could have other mechanical issues as well. There could be a mechanical problem like a lifter problem that sort of would equate to what you were talking about the valves not opening and closing. The lifters actually are a mechanism which is part of the valve train which does open and close those valves. So if there's a problem there, that could also be an issue. To find mechanical problems, a compression test would be the way to go. Also done a video about that. And you're basically checking the mechanical integrity of that cylinder. So if there are any leaks, you will have a compression loss. And if you have a compression loss and your engine can't function mechanically, well, everything else, you know, fuel injection, ignition, everything doesn't work properly from that point. So if you do have a misfire caused by a mechanical issue, you need to address that mechanical issue first before anything else will work properly. In fact, many times I suggest you start there in those situations just to get that out of the way, because so oftentimes I believe in performance diagnosis, people forget that there's a mechanical component to the engine. People seem to have a tendency to go for electronics or sensors or something like that that's causing the problem, when there are times, and more often than not, where it's a mechanical issue, and they go through, replace many parts such as you did, and they say, you know, throw their hands up in the air and say, I don't know what happened. I've even been guilty of this myself. You know, you get down this road where you're making assumptions about what you feel the problem is, and it misleads you completely. So with the basics with performance diagnosis, definitely you need to check mechanical integrity. You need to check the ignition system to make sure it's functioning properly. You pretty much covered the fuel system by the sound of it. It looks like you've replaced everything in the fuel system, so I believe you can eliminate that as a possibility. However, there still could be an issue there. So before you replace those components, a good idea is to check the actual fuel pressure and compare it to the manufacturer's specification for that vehicle and that particular engine. You take those things into account, find out if they're in spec. That way you know for sure whether or not that's a problem. So whenever you go through performance diagnosis, and this applies to anybody, you got to go through a set of logical steps. You can't just start throwing parts or just start making assumptions about what the problem is. You really need to focus on the issue and let the evidence lead you toward the problem, which will eventually present a solution. So it's a scientific process. It is the scientific method. You test and verify, and then you form theories based on that. You don't make an assumption and go in and say, well, you know, I think it's this, or the parts guy said it was this, or, you know, my friend down the street said, oh, same problem on my car, and it was this. Sometimes that works out, and that can get us into trouble, but follow the evidence. Check mechanical, check ignition. And, you know, I would also throw checking fuel pressure in there just for good measure. But I would do that last. I would check the mechanical stuff first. I've got videos on this stuff. There's also an article that I wrote on performance diagnosis that's on my website. You can go there. Performance problems, just click on that, and that'll take you through the steps, and has a bunch of information on problems like this. Okay. Let's see who is next. This is, all right, I'll do this one. Adam Edwards. Hey, Eric, I have a question about fuel grades and brands. Personally, I tend to stick to one gas station, Esso, due to having a points card and them being an Aeroplan partner. Most people I know also tend to stick to one gas station for similar reasons, such as Ultramar for the 2 cents off they get for a liter for the cards, or Irving because they get coupons from grocery retailers, stuff like that. I always thought station loyalty around here was based on how one values the rewards program, since regulated gas prices here in Nova Scotia result in all stations having the same price. One of my friends, though, swears by Petro-Canada gas entirely on the basis of their gas isn't terrible, and it is insistent that their gas runs far better than anything from the other stations. And if he fills up at other stations, he also uses 89 or 91 octane to get the same quality of a drive. Is there some kind of placebo effect of better gas between gas stations that you have seen before, or is this perhaps related to possible variation of ethanol content in gasoline between stations, since they all say up to 10%? I thought this was a good question, and I will say that there is a certain level of placebo effect. A few years ago, I made a video on octane ratings and the four-stroke engine cycle, and I went through the meanings of octane and why they have an octane rating, which an octane rating is actually using the RM2 method. There are several different methods. There are other methods of rating octane, but using the RM2 method, octane is a rating of resistance to burning. And the reason why they would have that is because on higher compression engines or engines that create more heat, there's more of an opportunity for the fuel mixture to ignite before the spark plug sets it off. This can cause detonation, misfires, and that type of thing. And all that stuff is not good for the engine. Now, in order to combat this, manufacturers will recommend a certain octane level for that engine. And it's usually performance applications or turbo applications, it's forced induction superchargers, that type of thing, where they recommend these higher octane fuels. And the reason for it is because the higher the octane, the more resistance it has to burning. So if it heats up as a result of being compressed, it does not ignite until the spark plug tells it to, and you get the most power from it. So that dispels the quote-unquote rumors about putting higher octane in your vehicle. Now, the placebo effect comes, I believe, from a perceived value of a higher octane fuel. And I'm not saying there are not occasions where putting in a higher octane fuel in your engine can be of benefit or be a perceived benefit. You may notice an improvement in your gas mileage. You may notice an improvement in performance. But it's really difficult to measure sometimes, unless you're very familiar with the vehicle and you keep very meticulous records and you drive along the same patterns and that type of thing. It can be difficult to measure. Aside from that, as far as the different locations where you get the gas or the different brands of gas, there are really only, well, it's hard to say. I don't know about Canada as much, but for the most part, there are only so many refineries on the planet. So as far as where they get those petrochemicals that are in gasoline, oil, and everything else, that may come into play, but there's so much refining and engineering that goes into, and there's also additive packages. Maybe this is what he's talking about. The ethanol level could be an issue, especially on older vehicles. Some older vehicles won't respond to that as well as some other vehicles. So up to 10% doesn't really seem like that much. There are other places that are far higher than that. And in fact, flex fuel vehicles come into play with those in those situations because they're designed to run on higher ethanol fuels. All right, I'm getting off on all these tangents. But okay, so you've got brand X where they have a certain additive package. Maybe they put in something to help clean the valves or help prevent, especially in Canada, fuel line freezing, and other additives that they put into the gasoline. So you've got the basic gasoline or petrol that you have there, and then they add things to it to add value to it, so to speak. That does come into play. Now, certain vehicles being affected by certain gas and other gas, it's once again, it's really difficult to say. If he believes that gasoline is giving him the performance for the money that he's investing into it, I say, hey, go for it. It's hard to say whether or not he's wrong because it's his experience. And it may very well be the additive package, like I said. It may very well be the ethanol content, like you mentioned. It just depends on the vehicle. But for the most part, fuels, you know, especially when the octane rating and everything, should be pretty much the same. However, there's also something else that comes into play that I'm forgetting to mention here: moisture or sediment in the tanks at the fill station itself. Whenever I see the tanker truck pulling up to the gas station, I kind of wait, and I don't go and fill up during those times. And one of the main reasons I don't is because as they're putting that fuel into those tanks, if there's sediment or moisture in that tank, as they're pouring the fuel in, it all gets mixed up, and then all goes out the lines. And then you fill up your vehicle, and you could be filling up your vehicle with some of that sediment and some of the other stuff. Now, granted, you have fuel filters and everything to deal with this, but say gas station or fuel station X has a lot more sediment in their tanks than fuel station Y. Well, that's something else that could come into play. So there's a lot of factors here. Placebo effect, yes, does play a factor. Is there some physical reason for what he's talking about? Possibly. It's really difficult for me to say, but that's what I know. And I hope that information helps you settle a bet, settle an argument, what have you. If you do, let me know over at the forum. But let's move on to another question here. We've already eaten up 15 minutes. It's amazing how fast time goes. Okay. We've got Joey Ramon 442. All right, cool. I love the Ramones. Hey Eric, I love the videos and have learned a lot from them. You even helped me in my decision to go to tech school for diesel mechanics. Well done. Congratulations and good luck in school. I just a 1997 Ford Ranger 3-liter V6 for cheap. I ran the codes and found it's misfiring on cylinders 1, 3, and 6. I tried new spark plugs since the old ones were pretty bad, but the truck still runs rough. What do you recommend I look at? I don't just want to throw money at it and would rather hear what steps it would take to diagnose the real issue at hand. That sort of goes back to the question that was asked earlier about the vehicle that was also misfiring and not running correctly. One thing in your situation, since it does actually run, is I oftentimes, with something like that, start with a cylinder balance test, a power balance test. And the way to do this is to disable the ignition on each cylinder one at a time and look for an RPM drop. You can do one of two ways. If you have ignition wires, you can unplug the ignition wires. Sometimes that can get a little dicey. So if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can unplug fuel injectors one at a time, or if you have individual coil packs for each cylinder, you can unplug each one of those coil packs individually. In essence, it's the same whether you're disabling the fuel or disabling the ignition. Whenever you unplug something, what you're looking for as the engine's running, you're looking for the engine to start running rough. You're looking for the RPMs to drop a little bit. If you unplug a fuel injector or disable the ignition for a particular cylinder and nothing happens, it just keeps running just the way it is, it's likely that cylinder is not contributing to the power output of that engine. If that's the case, that means that could cause misfires. It's not, the engine is out of balance, as I say, a power balance test, because each cylinder needs to produce an equal amount of power or as equal amount of power as it can in order for an engine to run smoothly. If one cylinder is down on power, the rest of the cylinders have to make up for it, and there's sort of a skipping effect, the misfiring effect, if you will. And a way to find that is to, disable each cylinder individually and see if you can narrow it down. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I can't remember whether that one was, I think it's the later model Fords that actually had a problem with water leakage onto the engine, and it caused the coil packs to burn up. So it could be a coil pack problem, but I can't remember on 97 whether they were running coil packs then, individual coil packs back then, or if they still used some form of wires and plugs or something like that. So I can't remember how they had that set up. But if you do have the individual coil packs, I would look for a coil pack that might be burned up or something like that. And also, it's right around the cowl area, right around where you're talking around 3 and 6. That there was water leakage that would cause issues with those coil packs. Just remembering somewhere about that, but the procedure is the same. Also, you can check fuel pressure, and if that's down. But fuel pressure issues don't normally cause misfires on just 3 cylinders. It would be across the board. if fuel pressure was an issue. But in your case, I'd be looking at the ignition system. But also, once again, don't forget about mechanical. So you're in school like that, you may run a compression test just to see what all the cylinders are doing. It's very similar to doing the power balance test, except for you're checking the compression, you're checking the mechanical health of each one of the cylinders. If you got a cylinder that's down on compression, it's not going to be able to contribute like the other ones. As a result, the engine will be out of balance, won't run correctly, misfires, won't work right. So good luck at school. All right, moving on to something else. What we got here? What we got here? I'm looking for one in particular. Here we have. And this is one of those names that I'm going to apologize for in advance. Stajepan Dopar writes, "Hey Eric, I have a 2000 Toyota Yaris 1.0 VVTi with looks like 39,000 miles, and I have a strange tapping noise inside the engine, maybe coming from the top of the engine. I'm experiencing a rough idle, and the car is noticeably shaking, and I suspect a worn-out timing chain, rocker arms, or hydraulic lifters. These noises occur when the engine is hot. When I rev up the engine, the noise disappears. Can you give me some advice? I don't want to rush in and just change the timing. I'm 16 years old, and I've learned so much from your videos. I sometimes watch your videos for a few hours a day and just read other automotive stuff, sometimes in the whole day. Thank you for your time and really enjoy watching your videos. Wish there were more guys like you out there." Thank you very much for saying that. And you sound like you might grow into being a technician someday, and this may be the start for you. One of the clues that sticks out in my mind about your statement here is that when you rev the engine, the noise goes away. That could, and I'm just saying could, indicate an oil pressure issue. I mean, you've got engine noise, and it goes away when you rev the engine. When you rev the engine, traditionally, the oil pressure should raise when you do that. And if that's the case, and the noise is going away, that could mean that you have an oil pressure issue. If you have an oil pressure issue, it can cause issues with timing chains, because a lot of timing chains they use a hydraulic tensioner, meaning they use oil pressure to hold tension on the timing chain. Without that pressure, the timing chain will be sort of flopping all over the place, can create noise. Also, the camshafts, or camshaft, I believe on that has 2 camshafts, if I'm not mistaken, start going all over the place. These things happen, you'll get that noise that you're talking about and the performance issues that you're also talking about, because the mechanical integrity of the engine is compromised. It won't be able to produce balanced power, as we've talked about a couple of times in this. Thing is, oil pressure is not controlled by the oil pump. Many people say that, and not to say that sometimes failed oil pumps won't cause a decrease in oil pressure. Oil pressure is actually created by all the clearances between all the moving parts of the engine, particularly in the bottom end. So it's actually the resistance to the volume of output by the oil pump that creates the oil pressure. The oil pump doesn't really make the pressure. It just sends a volume of oil up through the engine. The pressure is created by the tighter the clearances between the moving components of the engine. As those clearances wear out, oil pressure is decreased because it just leaks out that larger gap, so to speak. So when that happens, a lot of times it's pretty much the kiss of death for the engine, if I'm honest, because you can go in and rebuild it, but oftentimes it's less expensive just to replace it. And that depends on the engine, its availability, all that type of thing. But for the most part, rebuilding engines and modern engines is kind of a tricky business. But if you do decide to do it, make sure you make good friends with your local machine shop, because they do that kind of work all the time, and they can guide you along the way. But it does require some specialized tools, also a certain level of experience that's helpful with that. So for you, I would recommend that you start by checking the oil pressure and compare it to the spec. And if it's low, then you may be looking at possibly looking for another car, or have fun with this one till it dies. That's also a possibility. If you know your engine's on the way out, don't go too far from home or too far away from where you can call people, and just drive it. And one day it will die. Know that. One day it will die. Keep it topped off with oil. That's always a good thing. And this, I probably should have mentioned that at the beginning of my response, is that a good idea to check the oil in that situation. A low oil level can also cause problems like this. So check the oil. Do the simple stuff. Always start with the simple stuff. There's more information over on my website on diagnosing noises and that type of thing over there as well. So good luck to you. Oh, wow. Where has this show gone? All right, Craig Oliver. I have a 2001 Chevy Tahoe. AC is on the fritz. I'm sorry. I purchased an AC manifold gauge set from Harbor Freight. I want to attempt to chase down the leak in the system, but I'm unsure how to attach the hoses. I know they are color-coded, and the 3 hoses have a stationary pin inside each hose. For the red and blue, they are attached to the manifold and the high-low connectors. I think I should have submitted this question twice and couldn't find a posted question. All right, Craig. I normally don't recommend AC diagnosis for the DIY, and the main reason for this is because many times AC diagnosis requires specialized equipment. You got a gauge set, that was a good start. But it also requires a certain level of experience, because you're already going in with the assumption that the pressure is low. Not saying that that's not a possibility. Not saying that you don't have a leak, because honestly, that's probably the most common problem that you have with an AC system. However, it could still be an electrical problem. It could be maybe a mechanical problem with the compressor. It could be a restriction someplace in the system. It could actually just be that the blend doors and things inside the dashboard, inside the actual HVAC assembly, aren't functioning properly. So you have to be able to do that. And just having a gauge set, you also have to know how to interpret those pressures once you get things hooked up. Now I'll answer your question. Really, with 134 gauges, there's only one way to hook them up. And they made the fittings one really large. I believe the low side fitting is the larger fitting, and the high side fitting is the smaller fitting. And once you've got the coupler onto the actual fitting, that's when you run it down to open up the Schrader valve inside of the pipe itself. So you want to make sure that it's turned counterclockwise all the way before you connect it. You know, sort of clip it on, pull back on it, make sure it's fully seated, and then turn the knob until you just see the needle move. Don't twist the knob all the way down. That's how Schrader valves get ruined, and that creates a leak. So you get done servicing the system, you think everything's great, you take your gauges off, next thing you know, you got a leak just at the service port, just where you had your gauges connected. I've seen it more than once. Some gauge sets, or just gauge sets in general, you have to be careful of when you start running down that knob, because what that's doing is it's got a little mechanism on the inside that makes contact with the top of the Schrader valve. And when it does, it opens that Schrader valve so that you can have access to that system. If you continue to push it down, that Schrader valve can get bent and damaged, and you get the problem that I spoke of just a moment ago. So be careful with that. Keep an eye on the gauges. As soon as you see the needle move, stop. And then you have to interpret the pressures, and that depends on the ambient temperature, it depends on the humidity, it depends on lots of things. Actually, I did shoot a video the other day that may help people with AC performance, and that is about cleaning condensers. That should be coming out in the not too distant future. I'm kind of excited about that one, because it doesn't involve getting into the system or anything, but honestly I got some great results from it. So look for that video in the coming weeks here. But as far as your problem, yes, you could have a leak, but that's how you hook up the gauges. So the red one goes to the high side, and that's usually the smaller pipe. And the blue one goes to the low side, and that's going to be the bigger pipe. But it also, you might have hookups on the actual compressor itself. And if the caps are still on, well, it depends. Some caps aren't necessarily color-coded. You match the color of the caps, but if they're 134 gauges, they will only go on one way. I hope that helps you, and good luck with that issue. I think we got time for one more here. Yeah, we got time for one more. Let's see. We've got Jesse Greisenheimer. Eric, love your videos. Keep up the good work. We have a 1990 Ford F-150 with a 5-liter EFI. It will start up fine and then die once it reaches operating temp. It seems like as soon as it goes into closed loop, it shuts off and won't start again. It will crank just fine but won't light off, and it smells like fuel. It actually backfired and melted the intake. If you wait until it cools down, it will start just fine. It has a new map, and I've cleaned the IAC. It has codes for coolant temp sensor, NOx sensor, and has a lean code. I'm stumped. I've also sprayed carb cleaner around the intake to check the vacuum lines for leaks, and nothing. Would a bad coolant temp sensor cause this? Abso-fraggin-lutely. The coolant temp sensor basically tells the computer what temperature the engine is at. When the engine is colder, it requires more fuel and a little less air because it's cold. But when it's at operating temperature, it burns fuel efficiently, and at that point, it leans everything out. The fact that it gets to a temperature where it's warmed up and cuts out, that is a strong indicator that there might be an issue with the coolant temp sensor, further backed up by the fact that you have a code for one. But don't just flat out assume it's a sensor, because it also could be the connector, the wiring. It could be an ECU issue, outside chance. That's the last thing down on the list. Most likely you are looking at a bad coolant temp sensor. As far as the NOx sensor codes, possibly related. What I would do this. I would probably replace the coolant temp sensor, and I'd inspect the wiring and everything, make sure it's all good. Probably replace the coolant temp sensor and then clear the codes and then see if the other codes come back. The lean code may be a result of the mixture that the engine is, or the computer is trying to give the engine. It's not enough gas. It's too lean. That's possible. Also, if you have exhaust leaks near the O2 sensor, that can also cause lean codes because air is actually being introduced into the exhaust system. The oxygen sensor thinks the engine is actually running lean. Fords are famous for cracking exhaust manifolds, which is why I mentioned this. So keep that in mind. So yeah, for you, I would start with the coolant temp sensor. Man, the time has flown by. Or I just keep talking. One or the other. Anyway, one last time. Eric the Car Guy t-shirts. Available at the website now for maybe another hour or so. So if you want one, go and get it. Let's close this thing out. First, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. I really enjoy having you here at these live events. I do these every other week, and the next live show will be on, let's see. It looks like the next show will be June 18th, so Wednesday, 7 p.m., just like this one, Eastern Standard Time, by the way, just like this one. Let's see. Questions. If I didn't get a chance to get to your question, I apologize for that. But once again, you can get answers over to EricTheCarGuy.com 24/7, 365. Welcome video there to tell you about all the amazing features that we have to help you with those things. Also, there will be links in the description of this video to many of the things discussed, and including other information on how to solve like performance issues like that. I'm going to link all the articles down in the description, so be sure to cruise down in the description. Remember, YouTube people, I'm not answering the questions there, and anything posted after the event is over will not be answered. Apologize for that, but I'll be back on the 18th, so there is a good thing. So let's see. I think that covers everything. So you can connect with me socially on Google+, Facebook, and Twitter. I close each of my videos with be safe, have fun, and stay dirty. I'll see you next time. In 2 weeks for the live show, and Friday's repair videos. So look for those.